I have a copy of this pen and paper RPG and Crypts and Things, and I think it has a couple of cool, unique aspects that really sets it apart from a lot of the indie and small press RPGs that started popping up, a couple of years ago when Wizards of the Coast released that open gaming license with D&D 3.5. Since it was so cool, I just wanted to take a few minutes and talk about it, sort of a review type thing, and hopefully get a few of you to look into it as well. Maybe even some of you would like to buy it. So to start off, Crypts and Things is a quote, sword and sorcery role-playing game by D101 Games, uses the D20 system from the open license agreement, like I said, but more specifically, it's based off of their Swords and Wizardry game, which you can find for free on their website, but I'll talk about that more at the end of this video. So, unlike Swords and Wizardry, Crypts and Things isn't free, costing about 12 USD for a digital copy. I think they use PDF, and either $23.50 or $40 if you buy a print version like I did, depending on if you want the soft cover or hardcover. I went with the soft cover, mostly just to save money. And as for the book itself, it's rather well done. It explains everything in a simple way so even newer players can understand it easily enough without wasting time going over the more basic things that experienced players are just going to kind of roll their eyes at. Also, something that I think is a big plus and is fairly rare now, the book itself is fully playable on its own. It has all the information you'll need for playing. It has information about creating characters. It has your Game Master's Guide. It has a bestiary with a couple different monsters. So it even has a starting adventure for first and second level characters, as well as a fully mapped out campaign world. But it's also not this giant tome like with Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinders. And so all of this information is in less than 150 pages. And there are pictures in it, like this one here, which has shows some of the monsters you have. And it's in bigger print than most of the mainstream stuff. Like if you saw a lot of the Dungeons and Dragons books have very small print so they can fit all that information in. And before I go on, there's one more thing I feel like is kind of worth saying or really needs to be said. Crypts and Things definitely started out with that sort of retro clone AD&D aspect, and added in the sword and sorcery genre and that sword and sorcery feel in afterwards. This irked me a lot since I've been a big fan of sword and sorcery. I was hoping that they would make a game where you start with that sword and sorcery feel as the base and then built up the gaming system around it, rather than the other way around. The system it does use is good in its own rights, but I was personally a bit disappointed when I found it didn't have quite the same low magic type of gameplay that I'd hoped. That being said, there are a bunch of good changes in the system from a lot of the other old school Renaissance types of games. Gives the sword and sorcery feel, and not as strong as I would hope that I said, and I'll get into that when I discuss the gameplay itself more. And as an OSR game, it does pretty well, but if you're looking for something that's more true to the letter and low magic, Howardian type of sword and sorcery, where almost no one in the world knows magic, and sorcerers are these really powerful, feared figures with cults, and they're as powerful as kings. Well, this isn't exactly it. That's where it stays with a lot more of that classic D&D type of gameplay, where, you can still run into wizards, just in any sort of castle or in any big city, and the player who is a wizard isn't, all that special, or not as special as they would be in, like, your classic sword and sorcery novels and stories and stuff. But so on to the part of a game that's going to make or break it, the game mechanics itself. As I said, it uses the D20 system from the older open game license that Wizard of the Coast released with D&D 3.5, and definitely fits into that sort of retro clone category of games that tried to capture the essence or even just remake early editions of the TSR Dungeons & Dragons. But it also did a good job of not alienating newer players of D&D. For example, Crypts and Things has rules for both the old school THAC0 system of armor and the newer increasing armor class with the hit bonuses, so that both older players that started off using THAC0 and the newer players that came in after THAC0 was abandoned can use the system they're more familiar with. And it gave a simple explanation of how to convert the two, so it didn't seem daunting for those of you like myself who never used THAC0, and THAC0 always seemed sort of confusing to me, but this did a good job of explaining it, so I get it a lot more. And since they explained it as a conversion, I also understand like how it built up to the system I'm more used to, which really helped me understand it a lot more. And so there are a few other things like that where it managed to hold on to that old school feel without abandoning the better evolutions that D&D has made since then, whereas other retro clones just go for that old system with, especially from the view of somebody who doesn't have nostalgia for the old games, where they really had a clunky feel that a lot of other retro clones keep, but this one doesn't. And as part of the sword and sorcery feel it's trying to give off, players have to be human, and there are only 4 classes: the Barbarian, Fighter, Magician, and Thief. The Barbarian class is really the only one I'll get into right now, because that's one of the things it really did well to capture that sword and sorcery feel. The Barbarian is sort of a mix of a ranger-esque wilderness dweller and a warrior, rather than just this dumb savage with a big axe that you see in most games. So it more fitted with the ideas of the sort of noble savage that Robert E. Howard used with Conan and Call, or Leiber did with Fafred, bringing the class much more to a traditional sword and sorcery feel. Something worth noting is that the classes are a lot more comparable than other systems as well. So, for example, the class with the lowest hit points, the Magician, has only 1d6 hit dice, and the highest, the Fighter, has a full 1d6 plus 2 hit dice. So this goes a long way to establishing realism, where the difference comes as characters level up, and the warrior trains to become this battle-hardened fighting force, and the wizard stays with his tomes rather than having the hit dice start all the way down from a D4 to a D12, starting with this massive gap in stats, and really only enforcing it as you continue to play with certain classes. But this doesn't mean all the classes are the same. The characters are going to have the same feel. To make up for the similar classes, to make up for the similar classes and everyone being the same race, you can give your character life events, which change your character's stats so that he or she isn't this cookie-cutter human that everyone has to play. Also, each of the classes advance differently, so that you level up at different rates, and even 2 players of the same class will advance at, different rates and have like a variable advancement, because if you have high stats and certain attributes, you can get an XP boost of up to plus 15%, so your character advances faster. This kind of creates an unbalance though, which I'll get into later, as well as prevents a multi-class system from being in the game. The lack of multi-classing could also be part of the sword and sorcery aspect, as having everyone being able to cast magician spells would just totally obliterate that low magic feel that's a big part of especially the older, more traditional sword and sorcery stuff. And then with the way this barbarian works, he fits as sort of in between the fighter and the rogue, or the thief, so you don't really need to multi-class any of those either. It would just get kind of redundant. A few points worth mentioning on the game system. I thought they handled armor very well. So like in Dungeons & Dragons 3.5, which is what I'm most familiar with, because they tried getting in a bunch of different types of armor, and you need, your small shield and your buckler and like the different types of shields as well, and you needed to make each one different in game terms. So you had, so everything needed to like one up the armor below it. So using just standard equipment, no magic, no enchanted items, and without like your dex bonus or dodge bonus and stuff, a character could get an AC of up to plus 12 if you played your cards right and got the right sort of equipment, which, min-maxing and picking feats to be able to use certain armors and stuff. A first level could also get absurdly high AC bonuses, just be way too powerful so that none of the creatures it actually faces are all that much of a threat. But Crypts and Things boiled armor back to just the basic. There are 4 types of armor, and there's only one shield. You don't have big shield, little shield, tower shield, buckler. You just have shield. So the max AC bonus you can get from your equipment alone only goes up to plus 7, which is lower than just a single piece of armor, the plate mail, in newer editions of D&D. So it prevents players from being overpowered and also simplifies the game. So you don't need to keep track of, the difference between, your plate mail and your half plate and all that. It just really keeps it simple. The weapons are also boiled down to a smaller number, which keeps it simpler and also more realistic. It doesn't really matter if you're getting hit with a metal mace or a wooden club, or if your knife is a punching dagger or just a regular dagger. It's going to have the same chance if the blow would do you in or not. Also related to weapons, I guess, is the 2-weapon fighting. The rules here are a lot more simplified than other editions I've come across, and even if it doesn't make that much sense when you really start to think about how it is in gameplay. So if you're dual wielding, one of the weapons has to be a dagger, which, it makes sense. You can't really have one massive axe in each hand and, be able to wield them both effectively. I probably would have allowed a short sword, and but it's something I can live with. And you get an attack roll. You only get one attack roll, and you get it at plus 1 to hit. But the damage is the average between your dagger and your other weapon. I also like what they did with hit points. In most games, hit points are kind of this abstract thing that just goes down until you die. In real life, a wound doesn't just hurt, it would actually prevent you from fighting. If an arrow hits you in the shoulder, then you won't be able to use your arm as well. And if you get stabbed in the leg, you can't run. But in a lot of games, and every pen and paper RPG I've seen other than RuneQuest, a character will fight just as well if they're on the verge of death and if they're fresh and the battle just started, almost as if you're the Black Knight from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Crypts and Things explains this by saying your hit points are just superficial wounds, a shallow cut or a bruise from a blow that didn't make it through your armor, even just fatigue from battle. When you're run out of hit points, rather than just dying or getting knocked unconscious, your character is going to start taking damage to Constitution, which is like a serious wound, something life-threatening. And every time you take damage to Constitution, there's a chance you could get knocked unconscious or, just pass out from just how bad your wound is. And also, you'll take a penalty anytime you try to do an action or try to make an attack because, you're injured. You can't fight as well as somebody who's, fresh. So, also, because the hit points are the slight thing and Constitution damage takes a lot more time to heal, it sort of also helps hit points, be boosted back up if you're going for that low magic classic sword and sorcery where you don't have a lot of, healing magic going on. So your hit points, because they're just superficial, it's just a scratch, it's just a bruise, it's just fatigue, you heal that up really quickly. So it keeps it fast-paced and action-oriented, like a classic sword and sorcery type deal that compensates for lower amounts of healing magic. So, whereas D&D, your cleric can just go, boop, full health. You can't do that, so you have to compensate with this faster healing. My only real complaint is that, by no stretch of the imagination, it is just totally imbalanced towards magicians who just get absolutely shafted. First, their progression's the slowest in the game. They take more XP to level up than any other class. So as your campaign goes, it's only going to get worse for your magician. The wizard character is going to sort of slow down, so there will be weaker compared to both other members in your party, but also the monsters they're up against. Equipment-wise, a magician can only wear leather armor, which is the lightest in the game, cannot use shields, and they take a penalty if they're using weapons other than the dagger, dart, quarterstaff, or sling. So once you run out of magic, they're basically useless. I mean, you're as good as that at that point. And you're going to run out of magic quickly. This is one of the old school things that I didn't really like, is a very low amount of spell slots. So like a first level magician can only cast one spell per day. And again, that adds to that old school feel, but that's probably one of the changes I don't think should have been ignored. Then continuing with spells, magician spells are divided into 3 categories. You have good white magic, which does healing, your negative black magic, which deals damage and, like raises undead and, all the unnatural magics. Then you have gray magic, which is somewhere in between. And any time a magician uses anything other than white magic, so when they use the gray or black magic, they suffer consequences. So, in a sword and sorcery sense, that works because, they have to go into the realm of the gods and, wrestle like the magic of a demon to be able to shoot it out at their enemies. But game mechanics, with how weak the magician already is, at that point, they're just like completely useless. It becomes more of a liability without really adding anything of value to the party. Last thing I'm going to say about Crypts and Things is I'm going to do a quick comparison to Swords and Wizardry, which, as I said at the beginning of the video, is this free rule set that it was based off of. And so like I said, it's free online, and what makes it, why Crypts and Things is different than this game that you can get for free. Why pay for it? So Swords and Wizardry definitely has more of that classic feel and plays a lot more like early D&D. If Crypts and Clones, you could pick up that retro clone feel. Swords and Wizardry is just a retro clone, plain and simple. And it has, your classic fantasy stuff. You got multi-classing, non-human playable characters, and, even stronger imbalance between the different classes. It's a very by-the-book retro clone, which I personally not a big fan of. And so I think Crypts and Things did a lot better job taking that sort of OSR feel and also the newer elements of gaming and mixing them together really well. So it has the improvements of new games and the feel of old games with a nice splash, for a cool edge from that sword and sorcery genre that most games sort of don't really put in. All right, that's all I have to say about Crypts and Things. All in all, it's a good game, even if it definitely has some room for improvement, and it isn't really anything a few house rules couldn't clear up. Like and subscribe if you thought it was a good video, and put something down in the comments if you have any questions or if there's something you'd like me to talk about in future videos.